The morning came in hard and white over Route 46, the kind of light that does not warm anything, only exposes it. At 7:42 on a Tuesday, Delia Brandt stood inside the scale office of Iron Wake Auto Salvage with exactly $38.16 folded flat in the inside pocket of a coat too thin for the season. She had counted it twice on the bus. She had counted it again in the gravel lot outside the way a person counts a thing when the number is the only solid floor left beneath them. $38.16. Two shirts, one pair of jeans, a bus card with 11 cents still on it that would not carry her anywhere worth going. That was the whole of what was left of a life, and she had built that life over years, and a man had taken the rest of it, one signature at a time. Her phone buzzed once against her palm. The cracked screen lit up with a message from a number she had not saved and could not forget. I know where you are. No. Delia killed the screen with her thumb before the words could finish landing. Her heart went hard and fast against her ribs, a fist knocking from the inside, and she pressed the phone face down on the counter as if covering it could change what it said. She was out of time. She was nearly out of money. And she was standing in a junkyard that, according to the woman at the gas station 4 miles back, ate people for breakfast and spit out the bones for the crows. She had asked the woman only one question. She had asked if it paid cash. That was the only question that mattered now, because cash could not be frozen, could not be traced through a routing number, could not be reached by a man sitting in an office 2 counties away with a folder open on his desk. Cash was a door he could not lock from the inside. I don't care if 6 people already quit this week, Delia said to the empty office, rehearsing the sentence she had built on the bus, the one she would need to say without her voice shaking. I just need to know if it pays cash this Friday. The words hung in the dusty air. Then a shape moved in the doorway where the morning could not reach, and the room seemed to shrink around it. Holt Maddox stepped out of the shadow of the garage bay, and the leather of his vest creaked like a saddle taking weight. He was 58 years old and built like something the road had carved out of a man over a long time and many miles. Broad through the shoulders, gray in the beard, an old scar pulled pale across one cheek where the skin had healed wrong and stayed wrong. His work shirt was charcoal soft from 100 washings. Over it, he wore a worn black vest carrying red and white colors, and anyone who had spent time in this part of the country knew exactly what those colors meant. His hands were oil dark and scarred and very still. His eyes were worse than any shout. They did not move much. They did not need to. He looked at her thin coat. He looked at the exhaustion bruised under her eyes. He looked at the way she kept her canvas bag tucked tight against her ribs, the way a person holds the last thing they own. This is not a soft place, Holt said. Delia looked past him at the yard. Rows of dead cars sat in long, crooked lines, hoods up like open mouths. Stacks of tires leaned at angles that defied falling. Sunlight flashed off the gas tank of a Harley parked near the bay door, a hard silver wink, and the dust moved across the gravel, the way smoke moves slow and low and going nowhere in particular. Good, she said. Soft places haven't done much for me. Nobody laughed. But something changed in the set of Holt's shoulders. A small thing, the way a man shifts when he hears a sound and decides it is worth listening to. He did not offer her coffee. He did not ask her name. He walked to the corner of the office where the floor met the wall in a wedge of shadow and dropped a push broom against the cinder block. Then he set a ring of keys on the counterbrass, and steel, none of them labeled, all of them worn smooth from 1,000 pockets. There's the floor, he said. There's the desk. There's whatever's in those boxes nobody's opened since the last county headache. He pointed at a wall of warped file boxes stacked 4 high, each one marked in faded grease pencil. A 17, B09, D31, F42. You want cash Friday, you start with the worst corner of the worst room, and you don't stop until I tell you to. What's the pay, Delia said. Not a question exactly. A line she had to hold. $11 an hour for the trial. Cash Friday if you're still standing. He paused at the door and the light cut him in half, one side gold, one side dark. Most aren't. Then he was gone back into the yard and the door swung shut behind him with a sound like a coffee can full of bolts. Delia stood very still for a moment. Then she set her bag on the chair, took off her thin coat, folded it over the bag, the way you fold something you do not want anyone to touch, and picked up the broom. She started with the floor. The dust on it was not ordinary dust. It was the gray talc of a place where metal is cut and ground and crushed fine as flour, and it lifted in a cloud around her ankles and would not settle. She swept it into the corners, then out the door, then off the concrete step into the gravel where the wind took it. She found a dead mouse behind the filing cabinet, and a fork with two tines and a child's plastic dinosaur, faded the color of old chewing gum that someone had set on the windowsill years ago and never moved. She left the dinosaur where it was. A thing somebody had loved enough to keep was a thing you did not throw away, even if you could not say whose it had been. By 9:30, the coffee in the burn pot near the printer smelled like a tire fire, and the men in the yard had stopped lowering their voices when they passed the office window because they had decided she was furniture. Delia preferred it that way. Furniture got left alone. Furniture got to watch. And she was watching. She had learned a long time ago in a house she did not let herself think about that survival was a kind of bookkeeping. You kept track of where the danger lived. You knew which floorboard creaked, which mood meant a quiet night, and which meant a long one, which words could be said and which could not. You wrote it all down somewhere, even if only in your own head, because the day always came when you needed the record and could not afford to be wrong. So she did with this place what she had once done with her own life. She made a ledger of it. She found a yellow legal pad under the counter, 6 pages still clean, and a pencil worn to a stub. Box of 17 held toe slips from March, but also 2 receipts from late May, filed where nobody would think to look. Drawer B-09 was full of keys without tags. 24 of them, each one opening some lock that nobody could now name. The cabinet marked oil disposal had 3 coffee-stained invoices shoved behind a parts catalog, and the intake tray held a pink duplicate form dated the 18th of April with no matching original anywhere she could find. To anyone else, it was junk. To Delia, it was a map of where trouble could get in. The men of the yard moved past her window through the morning, and she learned them the way she learned the boxes, by watching. There was a young one named Cole, all elbows and apology, who could not seem to set anything down without it making a sound. There was an older man, broad and quiet, named Dutch Harmon, who ran the crane and never said 3 words when one would do, and most often said none. There was a lean man with a gray ponytail they called Briggs, who handled the scale tickets and counted under his breath. And there was Holt, who moved through all of it the way the hour hand moves on a clock, slow and certain, present in every part of the place, without seeming to hurry to any of it. They did not all wear the colors, but they all watched the road she noticed. Every one of them, at some point in the morning, let his eyes drift to the gate and the long, flat reach of Route 46 beyond it, the way men watch a thing they have learned to keep an eye on. A little after noon, Cole dropped a 5-gallon bucket of mixed hardware near the office step, and washers and lug nuts and rusted screws went skittering across the concrete like hail. A couple of men groaned. One laughed. Cole cursed himself under his breath because the yard was already 2 pickups and a flatbed of crushed appliances behind schedule and a drop bucket of hardware was the kind of small disaster that cost a man an hour he did not have. Delia knelt without being asked and began sorting the pieces by size into 4 cracked plastic bins, wiping the grime off each thread before she dropped it in. "You don't gotta do that," Cole said. "If the wrong bolt goes in the wrong place," Delia said, not looking up, "somebody pays for it later." The laugh died. Across the yard, Holt looked at her the way a mechanic looks at an engine making a sound he has never heard before. Not sure yet whether it is damage or whether it is something rare. Only certain that it means something. She worked through the heat of the day, and the office began to change under her hands. Forms found their years. Keys found their tags. Missing signatures got flagged with strips of blue painter's tape. The filing drawers, when she opened them, stopped coughing dust into her face. She found a way bill from the spring filed under the wrong vendor and moved it. She found a stack of intake photographs curling at the edges and pressed them flat under a parts catalog. The work was not hard. The work was only careful, and careful was the one thing she had always known how to be, because careful had once been the difference between a quiet night and a long one. Near 1 o'clock, she crouched to pull a crumpled receipt from under the filing cabinet, reaching her arm into the shoulder, and as she shifted her weight, a folded sheet of paper slid out of the envelope tucked in her own bag and dropped onto the dusty floor. She saw it before she could stop herself from seeing it. The top line showed a forwarding address she had not lived at in months. Below it, a legal seal, the embossed kind that catches the light. And below that, in type that had been printed by a machine in an office, she could picture too clearly a name. Sutton Gray. Her hand closed around the paper too fast, the way you grab something falling off a high shelf, and she crushed it into her fist and pushed it back into the envelope, and the envelope back into the bag, and the bag tighter against the wall. When she straightened up, Holt was standing in the doorway. He had not made a sound. He had a black coffee in one hand and the morning behind him, and he was not looking at the bag. He was looking at her face, at the thing that had crossed it before she could pull it back down. He did not ask. That was the first kindness he showed her, and he showed it by saying nothing at all. But Delia understood, in the way you understand a thing without words, that he had seen it. And in the same moment, watching him decide not to ask, she understood something about herself she had not let herself know until just then. She had not come to Ironwake looking for work. She had come looking for a place where the man chasing her would be afraid to step inside. Holt set the coffee on the corner of the desk. "Creamer's old," he said. "Probably not deadly." Then he was gone again, and Delia almost smiled. Almost. It broke before it formed. The yard kept grinding through the long middle of the day, thick with the smell of hot rubber and old oil, and sun-struck steel and gasoline trapped in dead tanks. Trucks rolled across the scale and coughed in line. Drivers leaned out with elbows gone brown from the road. The crane swung its yellow arm over the stacks, and every sentence the men shouted seemed to have to fight its way through metal before it reached another human being. At 12:41, she pried free the warped bottom drawer of the cabinet beside the scale printer, the one everyone had given up on because it stuck halfway, and scraped the floor. Inside, wedged behind a buckled folder, she found a packet of county inspection papers held together with a dry, cracking rubber band. The top sheet carried Ironwake's permit number in the corner, a checklist stamped in red, and a renewal date that made the back of her neck go cold. It was not expired. It was worse than expired. It had been filed under the wrong classification, which meant that anyone who looked at it fast, anyone who wanted to, could make the whole yard look guilty of something it had not done. Delia spread the pages across the counter and laid the receipts she had sorted that morning beside them, matching dates to numbers, and she saw the pattern in under a minute. Someone had put the right papers in the wrong place, and the wrong person on the wrong day could turn that small mistake into a fine large enough to hurt. She did not know it yet, but she had just found the place where trouble would walk in. She had found it before trouble arrived, the way she had once found the creak in the floorboard before the footstep came. And she set a strip of blue tape on it, a small flag of warning, the way a person marks the spot where a thing went wrong, so they will not be caught off guard when it goes wrong again. Outside, gravel popped under slow tires. A silver county sedan rolled through the gate, washed clean enough to look like an insult in a yard full of honest dirt, and stopped beside the scale at exactly 1:13. Holt turned his head before the engine had even cut. Delia looked down at the inspection packet in her hands and felt the day tilt, because she knew the way she always knew now that trouble had arrived before anyone was ready for it. The man who got out of the sedan stepped onto the gravel like he was trying not to breathe the same air as everyone else in the yard. His shoes were polished black. His shirt was pale blue and pressed flat. The clipboard under his arm looked cleaner than the hood of his own car, which already wore a thin gray veil of yard dust settling across it. He paused beside the truck scale, let his eyes pass over the stacks of wrecked Fords and Chevrolets, then over the bikers near the garage bay, as if they were just more of the scrap inventory items to be counted and disposed of. Nobody spoke. The crane creaked. A V-twin idled somewhere near the far gate, deep and patient. The smell of hot rubber pressed down on the office like weather coming. Holt stood in the open garage bay, with his coffee gone cold in one hand, his scarred face still his vest dark against the sunlit tin wall behind him. Delia held the inspection packet against her chest and wished for one sharp second that she had never pried that bottom drawer free. The man walked into the office at 1:16 and did not say hello. He set his clipboard on the counter. He looked at the woman behind it. Then he looked past her toward Holt in the bay. "I need whoever is responsible for this place," he said. Delia felt the words land exactly where he meant them to, sliding past her, as if she were the broom leaning in the corner, useful only when there was dirt to be seen. Holt stepped forward slow enough that no one could ever call it a threat. "You're looking at him," he said. The man smiled without any warmth in it and flipped open his folder. He introduced himself as Gideon Pratt, County Compliance, and he said the name the way some men say their own name, like it should mean something to the people hearing it. He said Ironwake had been flagged, irregular vehicle intake records, mismatched oil disposal forms, incomplete storage classifications, a missing county renewal attachment. He said the preliminary fine could reach $8,730 by close of business if the yard failed to produce supporting documents. Then he tapped the clipboard with the end of his pen. Tap, tap, tap. The sound made Delia's stomach pull tight. She knew men like this, men who turned paper into a leash and called it procedure. She had been married to one. She had spent years learning the particular smile a man wears when he believes the document in his hand has already decided the outcome and he is only here to watch it happen. Pratt began pulling forms from his folder and laying them across the counter with a kind of theater to it, naming each supposed failure loud enough for the nearest men in the yard to hear. One VIN was missing a final letter. One storage tag had been filed under dismantled salvage instead of temporary hold. One oil haul receipt appeared to carry the wrong date. One renewal sheet was simply absent from the packet the county claimed to have received. Each time he spoke, his eyes cut sideways to Holt, waiting for anger, waiting for one loud word, one wrong move, one excuse to make the paperwork bite down harder. Holt did not give it to him. He stood there broad and silent while the sun flashed off the Harley tank in the doorway. Delia looked at the pages Pratt had spread out, then at the packet still in her hands, and the numbers did not match the way the man was saying they matched. The VIN was not missing a letter. It had been copied out of the wrong column. The oil receipt was not late. It belonged to the transfer manifest dated the 8th of April, when the disposal truck had taken batteries and waste oil on the same run. The storage tag was not misfiled. It matched a classification code the county itself had changed 3 weeks earlier. Her pulse, which had been running fast and shallow since the sedan rolled in, began to slow. Fear became arithmetic. And arithmetic she could do. Arithmetic did not care whether your voice shook. Arithmetic did not care whether a man had spent years telling you that you were confused. Numbers were the one thing in the world that meant the same thing, no matter who said them, and Delia had been holding on to numbers like a railing for as long as she could remember. Pratt reached for a red violation notice, and Delia heard her own voice come out of her quiet and even. "May I see page 2 of your classification sheet?" The office went still enough to hear dust ticking against the window fan. Pratt blinked at her, then let out a short laugh the kind men use to put a woman back in a chair. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm not here for housekeeping." A couple of the men outside shifted their weight in gravel ground under boots. But Holt lifted 2 fingers, no more than that, and they went still. Delia set the packet down on the counter. She squared the corners with both hands, slow, deliberate, buying herself the half-second she needed to keep her voice level. "I'm not talking about housekeeping," she said. "I'm talking about the form you're using." Pratt's smile thinned. "And what would you know about county compliance?" She did not answer right away. She reached into drawer B09 and pulled out a short strip of blue tape she had torn off before his car had even cleared the gate. When she first saw the silver paint flash through the chain link and felt the old warning go off in her bones, and she laid it across 3 lines on 3 separate documents. Her hands were not perfectly steady, but they moved with purpose, and purpose covers a great deal. "Give me 11 minutes," she said. "If I'm wrong, you can write whatever fine you came here to write." Pratt looked at Holt as if expecting the big man to laugh along with him. Holt did not move. Outside, the crane cable clanked once in the hot wind. Then, with the air of a man indulging a child, Pratt slid page 2 of his classification sheet across the counter. Delia looked down. She found the date printed in the lower corner in type so small you had to want to find it. And she felt the whole trap fold open in front of her the way a road opens when the fog lifts. She put one finger on the code. "This is last year's form," she said. Pratt stopped tapping his pen. She kept her finger on the lower corner of the page where the tiny print read, "Revised the year before," instead of the current county classification date. And for one moment, Gideon Pratt did not look angry. He looked exposed, like a man who has reached into his pocket for his wallet in front of a crowd and found it gone. Then his mouth tightened and he leaned over the counter as if leaning closer could make the paper change what it said. "That doesn't change the missing attachment," he said. But the clean, sharp edge his voice had carried through the door was gone now. Delia drew the inspection packet closer and opened it to the first blue flag. "It changes everything attached to that accusation," she said. The office held its breath around her. She turned the first sheet toward him and tapped the intake number with the nail of her index finger. "You read M391, but this is M319. She let him look. "That puts the sedan shell in temporary hold, not dismantled salvage. So the storage tag is correct." Outside, the crane groaned as Dutch Harmon swung a strip pickup bed toward the far stack, and the sound rolled through the thin walls like thunder caught in a barrel. Pratt's eyes flicked toward the noise, then back. Delia moved to the second sheet. "The oil haul receipt isn't late. It's cross-filed with the transfer manifest from the 8th of April because the disposal truck took batteries and waste oil on the same run at 3:40 in the afternoon." She slid the matching invoice out of the folder she had rescued from the stuck drawer. There it was. Coffee-stained but signed. Real. Through all of it, Holt stood near the door, quiet and broad in his old vest, his gray beard still gone gray with dust, watching her without stepping in front of her. And that mattered more than she had words for. For years, men had spoken over her, around her, through her, sometimes for her. Holt did not reach for the moment she was building with her own 2 hands. He let her stand inside it. He let it be hers. There is a kind of man who, the instant a fight begins, must put himself between a woman and the thing she fears and tells himself it is protection, when often it is only one more way of taking the moment from her. Holt was not that kind of man. He had learned somewhere, somehow, that the deepest protection a man can offer is sometimes to stand back and let the person finish the thing they have started. She pulled the last page free, the one Pratt had called absent, and laid it flat under the buzzing fluorescent light. The renewal attachment was submitted electronically at 9:06 on Friday morning, 3 days before your notice was even printed. She circled 2 numbers with the blunt end of her pencil. "The confirmation number is here, and the county clerk's initials are here." Pratt stared at the page long enough that the silence got louder than the yard. Delia did not know yet, could not have known, that the renewal had been filed by a man named Earl, who had run the office before her and quit on a Thursday 2 weeks back without telling anyone the job was done. She only knew the proof was there, time-stamped, initialed, real. The system had kept the record even after the man who made it had walked away. That was the thing about a record kept right. It outlived the hand that wrote it. Pratt picked up his clipboard. He said he would have to verify the documents internally. Delia nodded once. "Please do," she said. "And when you do, you might want to bring the current form next time." A sound moved through the men outside. Not quite a laugh, not applause. Something lower and more satisfied than either, like a row of engines warming up in sequence, finding their idle one after another. Pratt gathered his papers too quickly. In his hurry, the red violation notice slid half out from under his hand, and he saw Delia see it, and he folded it back into the folder and turned for the door with a stiff back and yard dust, dulling the shine of his polished shoes. His silver sedan reversed away from the scale at 148 tires crunching gravel, and nobody chased him with a single word. They did not need to. When the gate rattled shut behind him, the whole office seemed to exhale. Cole set a dented mug of coffee on Delia's side of the counter and said it was fresh, which meant it had only been burning for 20 minutes. Another man dragged the broken chair out of the corner, tightened 2 screws on it, and slid it in behind her without a single word about it. Briggs, the lean one with the gray ponytail, paused at the window long enough to say to no one in particular that he had never in 9 years seen a county man back out of that gate without taking something with him. Then he went back to his scale tickets, counting under his breath. Holt waited until the yard had started moving again. Then he stepped to the filing cabinet, took a small brass key off his own ring, and set it on the counter in front of her. "You just saved this place close to $9,000, he said. Delia looked at the key, then at the boxes she had sorted the dusty forms she had decided to trust the blue tape still clinging to the truth. Her throat hurt. She had been called difficult, nervous, ungrateful, dramatic, confused. She had been called those things so many times by a voice she could still hear when she let herself, that hearing the weight of her own carefulness, named out loud as something useful, nearly broke something open in her chest. "I was just cleaning," she said. Holt shook his head slow. "No," he said. "You were paying attention." That was when her phone buzzed against the metal desk louder than it had any right to be. Delia looked down. One message sat waiting on the cracked screen from a number she had not saved and could not forget. "I know where you are." She stared at the message until the letters blurred, and for one breath, the whole scrapyard fell away from her, the buzzing fan and the burnt coffee and the grease-dark counter and the men outside calling numbers across the scale, all of it sinking beneath the sound of her own pulse. 4 words. Sutton Gray had reached through a cracked phone screen and put the old leash back around her ribs, and her body had answered before her mind could refuse, the breath going thin, the shoulders pulling and the hand finding the edge of the counter. Holt did not grab the phone. He did not ask for details in front of everyone. He did not turn the moment into a show of anger that would have been about him. He only stepped closer to the counter and spoke low for her alone. "You don't have to answer that." Delia nodded, but her thumb hovered over the screen the way the body keeps obeying instructions long after the mind has tried to cancel them. For years, her body had answered that name before her mind could weigh in, had learned to flinch before the blow that never came. Because the blows never came. That was the trick of him. The blows never came, and so there was never a bruise to show anyone, never a thing she could point to and say, "There, that is what he did." He had been careful. He had always been careful. He gave her paper, and paper did not show up in a photograph. Outside the yard came back to work in rough pieces. The crane swung with a tired metallic whine. A flatbed backed up with 3 sharp beeps. The V-twin near the base settled into a deep, patient idle. The smell of hot rubber and sun-baked steel drifted through the open window, and it should have felt ugly, all of it, the noise and the grease and the dead cars. Instead, it kept her from shaking apart. She locked the phone. She set it face down beside the blue tape flags, and she went back to labeling the inspection packet as if the message had not opened a trapdoor beneath her feet. By 6:28 that evening, most of the trucks had gone. The gate chain hung loose against the post. The towers of wrecked cars threw long shadows across the gravel, and the light went the color of weak tea and then the color of rust. Delia stayed in the scale office under the fluorescent tube, sorting the county forms into fresh folders she had labeled current archive, disposal, and hold, because work was the only thing that made her hands useful instead of afraid. Holt came in with a sandwich wrapped in brown paper and set it beside her legal pad. "People who don't eat," he said, "start reading the 3rd line wrong." Delia almost smiled. It broke before it formed. She looked at the sandwich, then at the phone lying face down, then at the locked drawer where he had told her to keep the brass key. "He's my ex-husband," she said finally. The words sounded too small for the damage standing behind them. Holt leaned against the counter and said nothing, which somehow made room for everything. So she told him. Not all of it, but enough. She told him Sutton had never once needed to throw a punch to make a room feel unsafe. He used bank accounts and lease agreements and insurance policies and forwarding addresses and joint titles and signatures she had given freely back when she still believed marriage meant trust. He had kept her name tied to a car she no longer drove, a storage unit. She had never been allowed to open a stack of paperwork that made the act of leaving feel like stealing from her own life. In the bottom of her canvas bag, she still carried draft forms from a county legal aid desk papers she had filled out 3 separate times and never once dared to serve. When she finally ran, she'd had $38.16, 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans, and a bus card with 11 cents left on it. That had been the whole rescue plan. She told him that part last, and her voice did not break, but it went very quiet, because there is a particular shame a person carries when the sum total of their escape fits in one coat pocket. Holt's jaw flexed once beneath the gray beard, but his voice stayed level. "Does he know you're working here?" he said. "Or does he just know you were scared enough to make him think he still owns the ground under your feet?" Delia looked up at him, startled by how cleanly he had set it down, as if he had taken a tangled thing out of her hands and laid it flat on the counter where she could finally see its true shape. For a long moment, only the metal walls ticked, the day's heat draining out of them as the dark came on. Then Holt reached behind the old parts cabinet and took down a spare key on a red tag. He slid it across the counter. "Back room behind the storage cage," he said. "Cot, blanket, working lock. No questions from anyone who wants to keep drinking my coffee." It was an old employee restroom, he told her, with a smoke detector that worked, and a desk phone that worked, and a camera mounted in the hallway outside the door. Not a favor hidden in the dark. A door with a lock on the inside, and a record of anyone who came near it. Delia stared at the key as if it weighed more than iron. It was not pity. She knew pity. She had lived inside pity for years, the kind that comes with conditions, the kind that wants to be thanked, the kind that keeps a ledger of its own and presents the bill when you least expect it. This was something else. This was a door, and the door had a lock, and the lock was on her side of it. Later, when she lay on the narrow cot with the smell of old leather and machine oil and faintly clean laundry around her, she did not push a chair under the handle. For the first time in more weeks than she wanted to count, she did not push a chair under the handle. She lay there and listened to the building tick and cool, and she thought, this is what it sounds like when no one is coming. Outside, a Harley sat near the office with its chrome holding the last of the light, and Holt sat on the seat, silent under the yard lamp, watching the gate until the dark settled all the way down. But Delia did not sleep right away. Something had been working at the back of her mind since the silver sedan pulled away. A small wrong note she could not place, the way you know a song has a missed beat in it before you can say where. She sat up on the cot. She looked at the brass key on the desk. And she thought about the red violation notice Gideon Pratt had folded back into his folder so quickly when he saw her looking. He had been in such a hurry. And in the hurry, when his paper slid, she had seen the top of that notice for half a second. A reference number printed across the top. She had read it without meaning to. She read numbers the way other people read faces. And the number had not been Ironwake's. She knew Ironwake's permit number now. She had been staring at it on a dozen forms all day, in the corner of every sheet, 3 letters followed by a string she could have recited in her sleep. The number on Pratt's violation notice had started differently. It had started with letters she did not recognize, and a sequence that did not belong to this yard at all. Delia got off the cot. She turned on the desk lamp, and she went back into the scale office in her socks across the cold concrete, and she pulled out the legal pad where she had written everything down through the long day, page after page, because writing it down was the only way she had ever kept herself safe. She found the line. She had jotted it without thinking, a reflex, the way she noted every number that crossed her vision. Pratt notice ref, and then the string she had glimpsed. She looked at it under the lamp. It was not a county yard number. It was not Ironwake. It had the shape of something else, something she had seen before in another life, on another stack of papers she had not been allowed to question. It had the shape of an account number, a financial account, the kind a bank assigns, the kind a man assigns to a thing he wants to track and own and use. Delia's hand went cold around the pencil. She sat down slowly in the repaired chair, and she thought about Gideon Pratt walking into a junkyard on a Tuesday with last year's form and a fine already written looking for a fight he had been told he could win. She thought about the way he had not actually known the place, the way his accusations had read like a list someone had handed him rather than findings a man develops by working a case. He had come in loaded, aimed, pointed at this yard like a tool in someone's hand. Somebody had sent him, and somebody had given him a reference number that did not belong to the county at all but to an account. And the only people who tracked her life in account numbers, who turned her name into a string of digits to be filed and redirected and used against her. The only person who had ever done that, the only person in the world. Delia opened the canvas bag. She took out the envelope with the legal seal and the forwarding address and the name printed by a machine in an office she could picture too clearly. She unfolded it with hands that had gone very still, the stillness that comes not from calm, but from the body bracing for something it cannot avoid. She laid the legal notice flat on the counter under the lamp beside the legal pad, and she matched the numbers. The account number on Sutton Gray's legal notice. The reference number she had read off the top of Gideon Pratt's violation form in the half-second before he hit it. They were not identical, but they shared the first 9 digits. The prefix, the root, the part of an account number that does not change when a man opens a new line, a new sub-account, a new instrument. The part that says, no matter how many branches grow off it, this all comes from the same tree. The county inspector had walked into Ironwake carrying a number that traced back to her ex-husband. Delia sat in the cold office with the lamp throwing her shadow huge across the wall of file boxes she had spent the day taming, and she understood all at once and all the way down that the morning's inspection had not been bad luck. It had not been the county finding a small filing error in the ordinary course of things. It had been the first shot. Sutton had not just found her. He had reached the place before she could even finish her first day in it, reached past the gate and the bikers and the locked door, and put a man in a pale blue shirt across the counter from her to start dismantling the only floor she had managed to find. He could not get inside the yard himself. So he had sent the paper in first the way he always had, because paper was the one weapon that walked through any door without knocking. The text message had not been a bluff. "I know where you are" had not been the desperate reach of a man losing his grip. It had been a man telling her plainly that the leash was already in his hand again, and that he had only let it out far enough for her to feel the freedom before he pulled. Delia turned off the desk lamp. She sat in the dark of the scale office for a long time listening to the yard, the tick of the cooling metal walls, the far-off shift of a settling stack, and under all of it, the steady, low idle of a single engine out by the gate where a 58-year-old man with a scar across his cheek sat on his bike and watched the road, not because she had asked him to, but because some men decide a thing is theirs to guard and do not require a reason past that. She thought about telling him in the morning. She thought about the brass key in the drawer and the red tag key on the desk and the camera in the hallway and the way the men had lowered their voices when they passed her window, not to crowd her but to give her room. For the first time in a very long time, she did not have to plan her escape alone in the dark. But she did not sleep either. Because somewhere out past the gate, past Route 46 in an office, she could picture too clearly a man who had never once needed to raise his voice, was sitting with a folder of his own, and the inspection had only been the opening. He would not stop at one inspector. He never stopped at one of anything. He built his pressure in layers the way frost works a crack until the stone splits patient, certain willing to wait because waiting had always worked before. Delia put the legal notice back in the envelope. She put the envelope back in the bag, and she sat in the repaired chair with both hands flat on the counter. Holt had trusted her to manage the way she had once pressed her hands flat to stop them shaking until the trembling passed and something harder took its place. Outside, near 3 in the morning, gravel popped under slow tires on the far side of the gate. Not coming in, the gate was chained, just slowing, just pausing on the shoulder of Route 46 headlights, swinging once across the chain link, across the stacked dead cars, across the dark window of the scale office, where a woman sat very still and did not move and did not breathe. The car idled there on the shoulder for 30 seconds, maybe 40. Then it pulled away slow in no hurry at all, the way a man drives when he wants you to know he is in no hurry, when he wants you to understand that he has all the time in the world and you have none. Delia watched the taillights shrink down Route 46 until the dark swallowed them. Out by the chain link, Holt's engine cut from a low idle to nothing, and in the new silence she heard the creak of leather as he stood up off the bike, and she knew without seeing him that he had watched the car too, that he had clocked it slowing and pausing and pulling away, that he had not gone after it because going after it was what the driver wanted, and Holt Maddox did not give a man like that what he wanted. He just stood by the gate in the dark, broad, and still between the road and the office. And inside, Delia Brandt picked up her pencil, turned to a fresh page of the legal pad, and at the top, in clean block letters, she wrote a single line. He sent the inspector. Then she began in the dark to build her case. The morning after came in gray, not white. A low ceiling of cloud pressed down over Route 46 like a lid on a pot, and the yard smelled of rain that had not yet fallen. Delia Brandt woke on the narrow cot with the legal pad still in her hand and one line written across the top of the fresh page, in her own clean block letters, the words she had set down in the dark, staring back at her in the gray morning light. She had slept maybe 2 hours, the kind of sleep that is not rest but a brief mercy, the body shutting off because it cannot run any longer. When she sat up, the page was the first thing she saw, and the second thing she saw was the gray light coming in around the edge of the door, and the third thing she felt was not fear exactly. It was something colder and steadier than fear. It was the feeling of a person who has stopped wondering whether the danger is real and started measuring it. She washed her face in the small sink. She folded the blanket the way she folded everything, now neat, ready to leave at a moment if leaving became the only thing left. Then she carried the legal pad out into the scale office, where the fluorescent tube was already humming, because she had left it on, because she had not been able to make herself turn off the light. By 6:40, she had a pot of coffee going, the burnt smell of it filling the room, and she stood at the counter with both hands wrapped around a dented mug and looked at the wall of file boxes she had spent all of Tuesday taming. A 17, B09, D31, F42. They did not frighten her anymore. They were hers now in a way, the way a thing you have put in order becomes partly yours. But the boxes were Iron Wake's history. What she needed was older than the boxes. What she needed was her own. She set the mug down and opened the canvas bag and took out the envelope with the legal seal. And beside it, she laid the legal pad open to the page where she had matched the numbers in the dark. The account number on Sutton Gray's legal notice. The reference number she had read off the top of Gideon Pratt's violation form. 9 digits shared between them. The root of the tree. It was not proof, she knew that. A shared prefix could be coincidence to a man who did not know how Sutton worked. To anyone who had not lived inside that machine, 9 matching digits were a curiosity, a thing to raise an eyebrow at, not a thing to take to a county board. But Delia had lived inside the machine, and she knew that Sutton never did anything in only one place. He layered. He left a trail of the same number across a dozen documents because he wanted always to be able to prove that everything connected back to him, that everything was his. Control was not just a feeling he chased. It was a habit of filing. He could not help himself. The same thing that made him dangerous made him traceable if you knew where the trail had been buried. She just had to find one more place the number lived. The door opened at 7:15, and Holt came in the gray light behind him, the smell of rain on his vest. He set a paper sack on the counter, 2 breakfast sandwiches from the gas station, and looked at the legal pad open between her hands and the envelope beside it, in the way she had not slept. He did not ask if she was all right. That was not a question men like Holt asked, and it was not a question that would have helped. Car came by the gate, he said. 3 this morning, slowed down, didn't stop. I saw it, Delia said. Holt nodded slowly. He pulled the broken chair around and sat in it backward, his arms folded over the top rail, and for a moment he just looked at her, the scar pale across his cheek in the fluorescent light. "You were up writing," he said, "all night." "I was up reading," she said, "and then I was up writing." She turned the legal pad so he could see the line at the top of the page. He sent the inspector. Then she set the envelope beside it, and she told him plain and level what she had found in the dark. The reference number on Pratt's notice, the account number on her own legal notice, the 9 matching digits. Holt was quiet for a long time. Outside, the first drops of rain began to tick against the tin roof, slow then faster, and the yard took on the hush of a place where everyone has gone indoors. "You're telling me," Holt said at last, "that the county man yesterday wasn't the county's idea?" "I'm telling you he came in carrying a number that traces back to my ex-husband," Delia said. "I'm telling you he walked in with last year's form and a fine already written like a man reading off a list somebody handed him. He didn't know this place. He didn't work this case. Somebody pointed him at you and pulled the trigger. And the somebody has the same first 9 digits on his paper that I've got on mine." Holt's jaw moved once beneath the gray beard. "Why me?" he said. "Why my yard?" And that was the question. Delia had turned it over in the dark for an hour. Sutton did not care about Iron Wake Auto Salvage. He had never heard of it before 3 days ago. He cared about one thing, which was her, and the yard was nothing to him but the place she had landed, the floor she had managed to find. He could not reach her here directly. The gate was chained at night. There were a dozen men in leather who lowered their voices when they passed her window. So he had done what he always did when he could not walk through a door. He had sent the paper in first. He had aimed an inspector at the ground beneath her feet, because if the ground gave way, if the yard buckled under a fine, it could not pay. If Holt Maddox decided one stray woman was more trouble than she was worth, then she would be back out on Route 46 with nothing, and a person with nothing is a person who comes home. "He's not trying to fine you," Delia said. "He's trying to make me too expensive to keep." The rain came down hard now, drumming on the roof, blurring the window, so the dead cars in the yard went soft and gray. Holt stood up from the chair. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain, his back to her, his hands hanging loose at his sides. "Then he made a mistake," Holt said. He did not say what the mistake was. He did not have to. The mistake was thinking that Holt Maddox priced people that way. The mistake was thinking that a man who had spent his whole life among the things the world threw away would look at one more discarded thing and decide it was not worth the trouble of keeping. He turned back from the window. "What do you need?" he said. Delia had been ready for that question since the dark. "I need to see if the number lives anywhere else," she said. "1 match is a curiosity, 2 is a thread, 3 is a rope you can hang a case on. I need to find where else Sutton tied his name to a piece of paper that touched this county, and I need a way to do it that doesn't put my own name back on a server where he can watch it move." Holt thought about that. Then he took out his phone, an old one, cheap, the kind a man buys when he does not want to be the kind of man who is easy to find. He scrolled and he made a call and he spoke a few words to someone on the other end low and hung up. "County Records Office," he said. "There's a clerk owes me a transmission and a favor. Public records. Anybody can pull them. But she'll pull them under the yard's name, not yours, and she won't say who asked." He looked at Delia. "You give me the number. I'll give it to her. Your name stays off it." Delia tore the page from the legal pad, folded it once, and handed it across the counter. It rained all that day. The yard ground to a near halt, the men working under the bay roof. The crane stilled the trucks, staying off the muddy lot. Delia spent the hours building the rest of her ledger because a thread was no good without the cloth around it. She pulled every form in the office that bore a date in the last 6 months, and she sorted them by classification, and she built on a long sheet of butcher paper. She found, rolled behind the cabinet, a timeline of the yard's paperwork going back to the spring. She marked the renewal Earl had filed at 9:06 on a Friday, and then quit 2 weeks later without telling anyone. She marked the day the county changed the classification code. She marked in red the day Gideon Pratt's inspection had landed. And when she stepped back and looked at the timeline, she saw something she had not seen the day before, because the day before she had been too busy surviving the hour to study the shape of the week. Pratt's inspection had landed on the first possible day, not a random Tuesday, the first Tuesday after the classification code changed, as if someone had been watching the county's own calendar waiting for the exact window when a misfiled form would look worst, and had sent the inspector through the gate the moment the window opened. That was not how the county worked. The county was slow. The county let things sit for months. This had been timed, aimed, fired the instant the target was widest. Somebody with patience. Somebody who watched calendars and waited for the window. Somebody who had built his whole life out of knowing exactly when to pull. Delia knew that patience. She had lived under it for years. She had watched him wait once 11 months for a piece of property to revert to a price he liked, never raising his voice about it, never seeming to want it until the day it became available, and he closed on it within the hour, because he had been ready the whole time, ready and waiting the way a spider is not in a hurry. The waiting was not weakness in a man like Sutton. The waiting was the weapon. The second blow came 2 days later, before the clerk had called back, and it came the way she had known it would on paper. It was not addressed to her. That was the cleverness of it. A certified letter arrived at the yard addressed to Iron Wake Auto Salvage, care of the owner of record, and Briggs signed for it because Briggs signed for everything, and he brought it into the office and set it on the counter and went back to his tickets. Delia looked at the return address and felt the floor go thin. It was a law office, not Sutton's name, a firm. The kind of name made of three other names, the kind a man hides behind when he wants the weight of the law without the weight of his own hand on it. Holt opened it standing up, reading slowly the way he read everything, and his face did not change, but the paper made a small sound in his fist when he reached the end. They're claiming, he said, that this yard is holding property subject to a financial dispute, that a vehicle in my intake belongs by some lien or other to a matter under litigation. They want it held. They want it inspected by their own people. And they're putting me on notice that if I dispose of it, I'm liable. Delia closed her eyes. She knew exactly which vehicle they meant. There was no such vehicle. There had never been such a vehicle. But it did not matter whether the vehicle existed. What mattered was that Sutton had found a second way to reach into the yard, a way that did not need an inspector, a way that turned Holt himself into a man with a lawyer's letter on his counter and a liability hanging over his head. The first shot had been the inspection. The second shot was this. He was raising the cost of keeping her one certified letter at a time, and he would keep raising it layer on layer until the price got too high for any man to pay. "There's no such car," she said quietly. "He invented it. He's good at inventing things that have just enough paper around them that you can't prove they don't exist without a fight. And the fight is the point. The fight costs you money and time and sleep, and he has more of all three than you do." Holt set the letter down on the counter flat and smoothed it once with the side of his scarred hand, the way a man flattens a thing he intends to keep. "Then we keep it," he said. "We keep every piece of paper he sends. We answer none of it in anger. And we put it all in the same place your number's going." He looked at her. "He thinks he's filling a box that scares us. He's filling a box that hangs him." Delia looked at the lawyer's letter and at the timeline on the butcher paper and at the envelope with the legal seal, and for the first time she saw it not as a flood rising around her, but as a thing accumulating in one place, a pile, a record, each new sheet, a little more weight on the wrong side of the scale for the man who kept sending them. He could not help himself. He had to layer, and every layer left a mark. The clerk called Holt back the next morning. By then the rain had passed and the yard was loud again, the crane swinging the crusher waking under its sheet metal roof with a hydraulic groan that rattled the office windows. Delia had settled into the work of the place, the cash from her first short week folded into the inside pocket of her coat, the brass key in the drawer, the red tagged key on the ring she now carried. The men had stopped treating her like furniture. Cole brought her coffee without being asked. Dutch Harmon, who never said 3 words when one would do, had nodded at her across the scale one morning, which from Dutch was practically a speech. Briggs had started leaving the harder scale tickets on her side of the counter, the ones with a math problem in them, because he had figured out she liked them. And a man shows you he has noticed you by leaving you the thing he thinks you will enjoy. Holt came into the office at noon with a manila folder under his arm. The rain smell gone from his vest, now replaced by the ordinary smell of oil and dust and hot metal. He set the folder on the counter and tapped it once. "Public records," he said. "Pulled clean. Your name's nowhere on it." He paused. She said the search was bigger than she figured. Said it took her most of the morning. Said there's a lot of it. Delia opened the folder. Inside were photocopies, gray and grainy, of documents filed with the county over the past 2 years. And she began to read them the way she read everything, the way other people read faces, and the room narrowed down to the pages under her hands. The first match came on page 4. A property lien, filed against a parcel 2 counties over a small house on a rural road, the kind of place a person buys when they are starting again. The lien had been filed 18 months ago, and in the corner of the filing in the reference field that most people never read was a number. 9 digits. The same 9 digits. Delia's hand went still on the page. She looked at the name of the person whose house had been liened. It was not her name. It was a woman's name she had never heard. Marin Vance. She read the lien through twice. It was the same shape as her own life. A financial instrument tied to a property the woman lived in. An obligation that should have been cleared and had not been. A claim filed by a third party, a holding company, with a name that meant nothing, the kind of name a man invents to put distance between himself and the thing he is doing. And in the reference field, the root of the tree. The same 9 digits that linked Sutton Gray's legal notice to Gideon Pratt's violation form. Marin Vance, a woman 2 counties over whose house carried a lien that traced back to the same account as the man chasing Delia. She turned the pages faster now, and the matches came. A vehicle title transfer, the same number in the corner. A storage facility default notice, the same number. A small claims filing from 3 years back, withdrawn before it reached a judge, the same number buried in the reference line. And then another name, a different woman in a third county with a different instrument tied to the same root. And then a fourth older, the paper yellowed at the copy edges. It was all there. Not one woman, a pattern, a method. The same machine run over and over on different people in different counties. The same instrument tied to the same root. A man who had built a kind of business out of doing to others exactly what he had done to her. The forwarding addresses, the titles that would not clear, the papers that made leaving feel like theft. He had not invented it for Delia. She had not been the first. She had been one more in a line, one more name fed into the machine, and the machine had a number, and the number was the same every time, because Sutton Gray could not help filing everything back to himself. Delia sat down slowly in the repair chair. For a moment, she could not separate her own life from the pages in front of her. Marin Vance's lien read like a letter Delia could have written. The withdrawn small claims filing read like the 3 sets of legal aid forms she had filled out and never dared to serve in another county by another woman who had also, it seemed, gotten close enough to fight back and then stopped the way Delia had stopped, the way the machine taught you to stop, because the machine made fighting feel more dangerous than staying. She did not know whether Marin Vance had gotten out. The records did not say. The records only said she had existed and had been caught in the same net and had filed a claim and then taken it back. Holt was watching her face. He had learned in 3 days to read it. "How bad," he said. "There are others," Delia said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "He's done this before. He does it for a living. I'm not the first." She put her finger on the lien on the name Marin Vance on the 9 digits in the corner. "And every single one of them ties back to the same account, the same number that walked into your yard on an inspector's clipboard." Holt looked at the pages for a long moment. "Then it's not just him chasing you," he said. "It's him running a thing. And running a thing leaves more tracks than chasing a person." "Yes," Delia said. And for the first time since the silver sedan had rolled through the gate, she felt the ground shift under her, not away from her, but toward her. A man chasing one woman could deny, could explain, could call her confused and dramatic, and watch the world believe him because the world wanted to. But a man running a machine, leaving the same number across a dozen counties, tying his name to property after property and woman after woman, was a man who had built a record. And a record in the right hands was not a cage. In the right hands, it was a door. She decided that afternoon to find Marin Vance. It was not hard in the end, which frightened her more than if it had been. The lien gave the parcel address. A public records search run, again through Holt's clerk, gave a phone number that had been listed 2 years back. Delia did not use her own name. She did not use the yards. She used a prepaid phone Holt bought at the same gas station that sold the breakfast sandwiches, and she sat on the cot in the back room with the door locked and the camera in the hallway, and she dialed the number with a hand that was almost steady. It rang 4 times, then a woman's voice, careful the way a voice gets careful when it has learned that the wrong call can cost you. "Hello, my name is Delia," she said. She had decided on the third ring to use her real first name, because a woman who has lived inside that machine can hear a lie, and a lie was the wrong way to begin. "You don't know me. I'm not selling anything. I'm not from a collection agency or a court or a bank. I think we have the same problem. I think we have the same man." The silence on the line was so long that Delia thought the woman had hung up without a sound. Then quietly, "What man?" "Sutton Gray," Delia said. The breath that came down the line was the breath of a person who has been holding something for a very long time and has just been told they can set it down. Or the breath of a person who has just been told the thing they ran from has found them again. From the sound alone, Delia could not tell which, because she knew both breaths had made both breaths herself, sometimes in the same hour. "How did you get this number?" Marin Vance said. "The same way he'd get it," Delia said. "Public records. A lien on your house, 18 months old, with a number in the corner that matches the number on my divorce papers." She closed her eyes. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to stop being scared. And I think the only way either of us does that is if we stop being one woman he can call confused and start being a record he can't explain." For a long time, Marin Vance said nothing. Then she began to talk. She talked for 40 minutes, and Delia listened and wrote on the legal pad in the dim back room while the yard worked on outside the locked door. Marin's story was Delia's story wearing a different coat. The charm first. Always the charm first. The way he made you feel in the beginning that he was the only person who had ever really seen you, the only one who understood how much you were worth, and how he then spent the rest of it slowly teaching you that you were worth nothing without him. Then the slow handing over of trust, signature by signature, account by account, because love asks you to trust, and you do not want to be the kind of person who cannot. Then the day you wake up and realize that every door out of your own life has your own signature on it, locking it from the inside, and that he holds every key. Marin had run. Marin had filed a small claims action. And then Sutton had sent her something she would not say what. That made her understand that fighting would cost her more than she had, and she had withdrawn the claim and moved 2 counties over and started again. And she had been waiting every day since for the slow car on the shoulder of the road. "He doesn't hit you," Marin said near the end. "People don't understand that. They want a bruise. They want a black eye to point at. He never gives you one. He gives you paper, and paper doesn't show up in a photograph." "No," Delia said. "It doesn't." "Are you going to fight him?" Marin said. Delia looked at the legal pad, 40 minutes of another woman's life written down in her own hand. The same machine, the same number, the same patient car on the same dark road. "I'm going to do more than fight him," she said. "I'm going to put it in writing." There was a long silence. Then Marin Vance said the thing that Delia would carry with her for the rest of the week, the thing that hardened the last soft place in her resolve. "I withdrew my claim because I thought I was the only one," she said. "He made sure I thought I was the only one. That's the trick, you know. He makes each of us think we're the only one because one woman alone is a story nobody believes. Tell me there are others. Tell me I wasn't crazy. You weren't crazy, Delia said. There are others. I'm holding the proof in my hands. When she hung up, she sat on the cot for a long while, and then she did something she had not done in years. She let herself shake, quietly with her hands over her face in the locked room with the working lock, while the crusher thundered outside, and the windows rattled, and no one could hear her, and no one would have shamed her if they had. She shook because Marin Vance was real, and because there were others on those pages whose names she had not yet called, and because the size of the thing was suddenly clear to her. Not a husband, but a machine. Not bad luck, but a business, and the weight of it landed all at once. And then she stopped. She washed her face again. And she went back to work because work was the floor, and the floor held. Over the next 2 days, she called one more. A woman named Ruth, 3 counties over, whose name had been on the 4th filing, the yellowed one. Ruth was older and angrier and had never withdrawn. Anything had simply run out of money to keep fighting and let the matter go dormant, which in the eyes of the law was nearly the same as losing. Ruth talked for an hour. Ruth had kept things. Ruth had a shoebox, she said, of every piece of paper that man ever sent her, because some instinct had told her, even when the world told her she was foolish, that one day the shoebox would matter. Delia listened to Ruth and understood that she had found something better than a victim. She had found a witness who had refused all this time to throw away the evidence. "I'll send you copies," Ruth said. "I'll send you the whole box. You put it where it does some good. I'm too old to be scared of him anymore, and I've been waiting a long time for somebody to ask." The crisis came the evening after Ruth's call, and it came the way these things always came, with Sutton on a piece of paper. Delia had been building her case carefully, methodically, the way she built everything. She had the lien. She had Marin Vance's account written down and dated. She had Ruth and the promise of the shoebox. She had the timeline showing Pratt's inspection had been fired on the first possible day. She had the lawyer's letter about a car that did not exist. And she had at the bottom of her own canvas bag the things she had carried out of her old life, like a coal in a closed fist, the things she had thought of in her worst nights as her weapon. It was a packet of documents she had taken when she ran. Copies mostly of the joint titles and the account authorizations and the insurance riders, the paper trail of her own captivity. Among them was one she had always counted on most because it was the clearest. A financial authorization signed by her that granted Sutton control over a set of accounts during the marriage. It was the document that proved in her mind the whole shape of what he had done, because the dates on it ran past the point where she had stopped agreeing to anything, where she had begun quietly to plan her leaving. If she could show that he had used that authorization after she had withdrawn her consent, after the marriage had failed in every way, but the legal one then, she could show the world the thing she could never make anyone believe with her voice alone, that he had taken what was not freely given. She took the authorization out that evening to add it to the folder, to lay it beside the lien in Marin's account, to build the rope thick enough to hang a case on. And she looked at her own signature. She had looked at it 100 times. She had signed her name 10,000 times in her life. She knew the way the D started the loop she made on the second leg of the B in Brant, the way she crossed the T low because a teacher in the 4th grade had once told her she crossed it too high, and the correction had stuck for 40 years. The signature on the authorization crossed the T high. Delia went very still. She held the document under the desk lamp. She took out the divorce papers, the ones in her bag with a legal seal, and she found her signature there. Real hers, the T crossed low. She set the two side by side under the lamp. The loops were close. Whoever had done it was good. They had studied her hand. But they had not known about the 4th grade teacher. They had not known the one correction that had become a habit so deep she did it without thinking the same way every time, year after year. They had crossed the T high the way she used to before she was 8 years old, the way she had not done since. The authorization was a forgery. The document she had carried out of her old life as her weapon, the one piece of paper she had counted on most, the one that proved he had taken what was not given, had her name on it. But it was not her name. It was his hand, or someone's hand. He had paid copying her name onto a paper that gave him what he wanted, and dating it past the point where she would have signed anything at all. And then the second understanding landed colder than the first, and it took the floor out from under her. If she submitted it, if she took it to a county board or a lawyer or a court and laid it down as proof of what he had done, they would not see a forgery. They would see her signature. They would see a financial authorization signed by Delia Brandt granting Sutton Gray control of accounts. And the only person in the room who could be charged with anything would be the woman who had walked in carrying a document with her own name on it that did not match the records, a document that on its face said she had given him everything. He had not just forged her signature. He had handed her a weapon that would go off in her own hand. Delia sat in the scale office with the lamp burning and the two signatures side by side, and she felt the old thing come up in her, the thing she had spent 2 years running, from the voice that was not her own voice, but had lived in her head so long it sounded like hers. You're confused. You're dramatic. You don't understand how any of this works. You'll only make it worse. Look what you almost did. You almost walked into a room and convicted yourself. You can't fight him. Nobody can fight him. The smart thing, the only thing is, to put it all back in the bag and get on the next bus and disappear so far, he can't aim a single piece of paper at the ground under your feet. She put her head down on her arms on the counter Holt had trusted her to manage, and for a long moment the run pulled at her with everything it had. The bus card, the 2 shirts, the cold, simple safety of being no one nowhere, a woman with nothing left, who at least could not be convicted of anything because she had stopped trying to prove she had been wronged. Marin had stopped. Ruth had stopped. The machine taught every woman it touched to stop, and here was the lesson coming, for Delia dressed up as wisdom, dressed up as the smart thing, the only thing. The office door opened. She did not lift her head right away. She heard the footsteps heavy and slow and the creak of leather, and she smelled coffee and oil, and she knew it was Holt before he said a word. She heard him set something on the counter beside her. A breakfast sandwich, though it was evening. People who don't eat start reading the third line wrong. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not put a hand on her shoulder. He pulled the broken chair around and sat in it backward, his arms over the rail, and he waited. The way he had waited the first night, making room for everything by saying nothing. Delia lifted her head. Her eyes were dry. She had not let herself cry over this one. This one was past crying. She turned the 2 documents toward him, the real signature and the forged one, and she put her finger on the high-cross T. "This is the one I was counting on," she said. "The proof, the thing I carried out of my whole old life so I'd have something to show. And it's a forgery. He forged my own name and dated it past the marriage, and if I take it to anybody to prove what he did, the only person it convicts is me." Her voice did not break, but it went very flat, the flatness of a person at the bottom of something. "I almost did it. I almost walked into a room and handed them a rope with my own neck already in it." Holt looked at the 2 signatures for a long time. He was not a man who read documents quickly, and he did not pretend to be. He took it in the way he took in an engine, slow, listening for the sound underneath the sound. Then he said, "Does he know you've got it?" Delia stopped. "What?" she said. "This paper." Holt tapped the forged authorization once with a scarred finger. "Does Sutton Gray know you carried this out of the house? Does he know it's sitting in your bag in my office on Route 46? "I don't know," Delia said slowly. "I took copies when I ran. He might not know which ones. He might think I left it behind." Holt nodded slow. "Then you've been looking at it from his side," he said. "You've been looking at it the way he wants you to look at it. Like a weapon pointed at you. Like a thing that goes off in your own hand." He leaned forward over the rail of the chair. "But he doesn't know you can read a signature the way you read a number. He doesn't know about the 4th grade teacher and the T. He made this thing to look like proof you gave him everything. He never once thought somebody might look at it and see proof that he forged." Delia did not move. "He knows you were scared enough to make him think he still owns the ground under your feet," Holt said. And it was the same thing he had said the first night, set down clean, and it landed the same way like a tangled thing laid flat. Questions whether you keep looking at his paper through his eyes or whether you start looking at it through yours. The office was quiet. Outside, the V-twin near the bay settled into its deep idle, and the crusher had gone still for the night, and the last light was going out of the sky over the dead cars. And Delia understood. The forged authorization was not a weapon pointed at her. It was only a weapon pointed at her if she walked in trying to prove what it claimed to prove, that he had taken control of the accounts. But that was his story written on the page, and she did not have to argue his story. She could argue the page itself. She did not need to prove what the document said. She needed to prove that the document was a lie. And she had the proof in her own hand, in the one correction a teacher had drilled into her at 8 years old, in the difference between a T crossed high and a T crossed low in the real signature on her divorce papers, sitting right beside the false one under the lamp. He had handed her a weapon. He had only been wrong about which direction it pointed. A forged financial authorization was not evidence she had given him control. It was evidence that Sutton Gray had committed forgery. And forgery was not a thing you called a woman dramatic for claiming. Forgery was a thing a handwriting examiner could testify to. Forgery was a thing a county board could not wave away. Forgery tied to the lien against Marin Vance, tied to Ruth's shoebox, tied to the same 9 digits that walked an inspector through the gate, was not the confused complaint of one woman. It was a record. It was a machine with the maker's number stamped on every part. Delia drew the legal pad toward her, and she turned to a fresh page, and at the top, in clean block letters, she wrote a single line the way she had written one on the first night. "It's not my weapon, it's his confession." Then she began in the lamplight to rebuild the case. Not the case she had been building for 2 years in the dark, the desperate case of a woman trying to prove she had been wronged. A different case, a colder one. The case of an examiner laying out a forgery. The case of a records clerk laying out a pattern. The case of a county compliance officer who had walked into a yard carrying a reference number that traced through public filings across 3 counties back to one account and one man. She worked until past midnight. Holt did not leave. He sat in the broken chair, and then he moved to the doorway, and at some point he was outside on his bike under the yard lamp. But every time she looked up, the shape of him was there between the office and the gate between her and the road. Over the next day, she built it the way you build anything that has to hold weight. Slow, square, every joint checked. She organized the public records Holt's clerk had pulled into a single binder sorted by date, each filing flagged where the 9 digits appeared so that anyone turning the pages could watch the same number rise to the surface again and again, page after page, refusing to be buried. She wrote out Marin Vance's account, dated and signed by Marin herself, who had mailed back a notarized statement faster than Delia had dared to hope, because Marin Vance, it turned out, had been waiting 2 years for exactly one thing, which was not to be alone in it. Ruth's shoebox arrived in a padded envelope thick as a brick, and Delia spent a whole evening laying its contents in order, and found in the bottom of it 2 more documents that carried the same 9 digits older than anything the clerk had pulled, pushing the trail back another 2 years. She laid the forged authorization beside the real signature, and she wrote in plain language the difference a layman could see: the high T and the low T, the one correction that no forger could have known. And she built the timeline of the inspection, the first possible day, the aimed and fired shot the inspector, who did not know the yard, and beside it she set the lawyer's letter about a car that did not exist. The second shot fired when the first one missed. And then, because she was who she was, she did one more thing. She made copies, 3 sets, one for the binder, one she sealed in an envelope and asked Holt to keep in the safe in the garage office, the one bolted to the floor, and one she mailed to a county legal aid desk 2 counties over with a cover letter she rewrote 4 times until it had no fear in it at all. Only facts, only dates, only the number that tied it all together. She was no longer a woman with $38 in a bag of paper she was afraid to use. She was a woman with a binder, 2 witnesses, a notarized statement, A shoebox of evidence saved by an old woman who had refused to be afraid in a forgery she could prove. The car came back on a Thursday. She had known it would. A man like Sutton did not send an inspector and a lawyer's letter and then go quiet because both had failed. He layered. He built his pressure the way frost works a crack until the stone splits. And when the paper failed to break the ground beneath her, he would come himself because some part of him needed to. Some part of him needed to stand in front of her and watch her fold because the folding was the thing he had always been after more than the accounts, more than the house, more than any of it. The folding was the point. It was late afternoon, the light going long and gold across the gravel, the men beginning to close down the yard for the day. Delia was at the counter with the binder open in front of her, checking a date against the timeline, when she heard the gravel pop under slow tires, and she lifted her head, and she did not feel the old cold drop in her stomach. She felt something else. She felt ready. A black luxury sedan rolled through the gate, washed too clean for a place like Ironwake. Its paint polished deep enough to catch the crooked reflection of stacked doors and crushed hoods, and the yellow arm of the crane stilled against the sky. It moved slowly past the scale as if the gravel itself should have made way for it, as if it were not a car arriving, but a piece of another life being dragged into the wrong world. Across the yard, a socket wrench went quiet on the far bench. Cole lowered a chain without letting it clatter. Dutch Harmon paused beside the crane controls and did not move. Briggs set down his tickets. The V-twin near the bay settled into a low idle that seemed to press against the metal walls. And Holt Maddox stepped out from the shade of the garage, his gray beard catching the long gold light, the scar pale across his cheek, his leather vest creaking as he walked. And he did not hurry, and the not hurrying was a language of its own. The sedan stopped beside the scale. The engine cut. The door opened. And Delia behind the counter closed the binder over the case she had spent her nights building and squared its corners with both hands, the way she squared everything now, and waited for Sutton Gray to come and find out at last that the woman he had called confused had spent the time he gave her learning to read. Sutton Gray stepped out of the black sedan at 20 minutes past 4 in a white dress shirt and dark slacks with thin sunglasses that made his stare feel less like looking and more like cutting. He brushed something invisible from his cuff, a thing Delia had watched him do 1,000 times, the small ritual of a man removing the world from himself before he deigned to touch it. The smell of oil and rust and old leather and hot rubber rolled around him, and his face moved through it as if the air itself were an insult he would deal with later. He looked at the wrecked cars. He looked at the grease-dark concrete. He looked at the bikers standing still at their posts. And then he looked at Delia behind the scale counter, and his expression softened into the thing she had once long ago mistaken for calm. "There you are," he said, as though she had misplaced herself, as though he had driven 2 counties over out of patience and concern to collect a thing that had wandered off and become confused about where it belonged. The yard did not stop all at once. It changed. The socket wrench stayed quiet. The chain in Cole's hands hung still. Dutch Harmon's broad shape filled the door of the crane cab without moving into it. The V-twin near the bay dropped to a low idle that pressed against the metal walls like a held breath. Nobody crowded forward. Nobody reached for anything. They simply held their posts silent in the long gold light, and the settling dust and Brotherhood he was learning did not need noise. He felt it anyway. Holt stepped out of the shade of the garage. His gray beard caught the long gold light. The scar ran pale across his cheek. He did not hurry, and the not hurrying made Sutton notice him the way a clean man notices the one thing in a room that will not be cleaned. "This is private," Sutton said, still smiling the smile aimed at Delia, but the words aimed at Holt. Holt stopped beside the office door, close enough to be present, far enough not to crowd anyone. "Not on my scale," he said. Sutton turned his attention back to Delia. He placed a leather folder on the counter, careful not to let it touch the grease, and he opened it with the unhurried ease of a man who has never once doubted that the paper would do what he told it to do. And he began to speak in the smooth voice that had once made bankers and landlords and clerks turn toward him instead of toward her. He said her car title still carried obligations. He said the insurance documents were unresolved. He said a forwarding address had legal consequences she did not understand. He said leaving without signing certain releases could create financial damage she would never be able to repair. Each sentence sounded reasonable the way a hand on your shoulder can sound reasonable right up until it closes. And he slid documents across the counter as he spoke papers with colored tabs, already attached the tabs, marking the lines where she was meant to sign. "You're confused," he said gently, the way a man speaks to a child in front of witnesses he wants on his side. "You signed authority on these matters long before you ran into this place. You need to come with me and settle it properly." The old Delia would have folded at that sentence. It carried years of locked accounts and redirected mail in rooms where her own name had been used against her until she could no longer tell whether the voice saying she was confused was his or her own. The old Delia would have felt the floor tilt and reached for the pen just to make the tilting stop. This Delia opened the binder. She did not raise her voice. She had learned over many nights under a desk lamp that the quiet thing carries farther than the loud thing in a room full of men waiting to see which way the wind will blow. "You're right that there's paperwork to settle," she said. "Let's settle it." And she began to lay her case across the counter one page at a time, the way he had laid his, except that hers had dates and witness lines, and the same number rising up through every sheet like rust through fresh paint. She started with the documents he had brought. She turned the first one toward him and put her finger on the date in the corner. "The vehicle storage authorization was tied to an account closed 8 months ago," she said, and she laid beside it the closure record from the public file, the date plain. The insurance writer used an address he no longer had legal grounds to use, and she laid beside it the filing that showed when the grounds had lapsed. The renewal paragraph carried her old signature, she said, and she set her finger on it, but she did not say what she had found there. Not yet. She let it sit. Sutton's jaw tightened. He glanced around the yard, and no biker moved toward him, and no one raised a fist, and no one gave him the scene he had come to provoke. They simply held their post silent in the long gold light. In the settling dust and Brotherhood he was learning again did not need noise. He lowered his voice, and the lowering made it colder. "Delia," he said, "don't embarrass yourself in front of these people." For one breath the office tilted. The smell of oil and burnt coffee, the men, the dead cars, all of it leaned toward the past, toward the house she did not let herself think about, toward the years when that one sentence in that one tone had been enough to fold her in half. Then she looked down at the binder, at her own handwriting. Clean, current, hers. "No," she said. "I think this is exactly the place for it." She turned to the second section of the binder, and she set the next page on the counter, and her voice stayed level. "This is a lien," she said, "filed 18 months ago against a house 2 counties over. The house belongs to a woman named Marin Vance." Sutton's face did not change, but something behind it did. A small thing, a flicker, the kind of thing only a person who has spent years reading a face for the weather can catch. Delia caught it. "You don't know that name," she said. It was not a question, and they both knew it was a lie, and she let the lie sit between them so he could see that she could see it. "There's a number in the corner of this lien, a reference number." She set her own divorce papers beside it, the legal seal catching the light. "There's a number on this too, the account you tied my whole life to. The first 9 digits match." She turned the page. "A vehicle title transfer 3 counties over, same 9 digits." She turned the page. "A storage default notice, same 9 digits." She turned the page. "A small claims filing withdrawn before it reached a judge by a woman who got scared the way you taught her to get scared. Same 9 digits." She turned the page. "A claim from a woman named Ruth who never withdrew anything, who kept a box of every piece of paper you ever sent her for 4 years because she knew this day was coming, even when nobody believed her. Same 9 digits." Page after page, the same number rising, and with each one the silence in the yard grew heavier. Not the silence of confusion, but the silence of men who have begun to understand exactly what they are looking at. You didn't invent this for me, Sutton. I wasn't the first. You run it. It's a business. And every single piece of it ties back to the same account because you could never once help yourself. You had to file everything back to you. Sutton set his sunglasses down on the counter slowly, and for the first time his eyes came fully into the light, and they were not calm. They had never been calm. She saw that now. They had only ever been still the way deep water is still with everything dangerous underneath. "You've been busy," he said. The smoothness was still there, but it had thinned. "Public records. A binder. You think a county clerk and a stack of photocopies makes you safe." "No," Delia said. "The truth makes me safe. This just puts it in writing." It was then that the second car came through the gate. It came slow and clean, conspicuous as a pressed collar in a yard full of honest dirt, a silver county sedan, and it stopped beside the black one. And Gideon Pratt got out in a pressed pale shirt with a folder under his arm. And for 1/2 second, Delia felt the old cold drop, because here was the trap closing. Here was the second front, the inspector and the husband arriving together to finish what one of them had started. But Pratt did not walk to Sutton's side. He stopped between the two cars, his polished shoes already graying with dust, and he looked at the black sedan, and he looked at Sutton standing at the counter, and something passed across his face that Delia recognized, because she had felt it herself the first morning in this very room. It was the face of a man who has just understood that he is not the one holding the leash, that he is the thing on the end of it. "I told you to keep my name out of it," Pratt said. He said it to Sutton low, but in a yard gone this quiet the words carried. "I told you a misfiled form, a renewal classification, a fine they'd pay and forget. I didn't sign on for—" He gestured at the binder at the bikers at the whole still and watching yard this. Sutton turned his head toward Pratt with a slowness that was worse than speed. "Be quiet," he said. But Pratt had spent the past days learning what Delia had spent her nights proving, which was that Sutton Gray left a number on everything he touched, and that the number had begun to trace its way back to a county compliance officer who had walked into a private business with last year's form and a fine already written. Pratt had seen somewhere in those days the shape of where the trail led when it ran out of women and started looking for the man who had aimed the gun. And a man like Pratt, faced with that, does only one thing. He starts trying to get clear of it. "You told me she was unstable," Pratt said, and now he was not talking to Sutton anymore. He was talking to the yard, to the witnesses building in real time, the record that would say he had been used. "You told me there was a property dispute and she'd hidden assets in the yard's intake. You gave me the reference number. You gave me the whole package. You said walk in and lean on them and she'll come home." His voice cracked not with feeling, but with the panic of a man who can suddenly see the floor of his own career through a hole that is widening. "I checked the number this morning after the third call from records. I know whose account it is now." The yard held its breath. Delia did not move. She did not need to. The thing she had built in the dark page by page was building itself now out loud in the open, in the one place Sutton could not redirect or file or seal. He had brought the inspector into the same room as the witness, and the inspector, looking down the barrel of his own ruin, had done the one thing Sutton had never once accounted for, because it had never once happened to him before. He had told the truth to save himself. "Page 2 of your classification sheet," Delia said quietly to Pratt, and the man flinched because he remembered. "It was last year's form. You didn't know. He gave it to you. He gave you everything, and he made sure none of it had his name on the front, only the number in the corner that you never read, because nobody reads the number in the corner." She turned a page in the binder and slid it toward him. "Except me." Pratt looked at the page. He looked at the binder. And then he did the thing that finished it, the thing Sutton could not have prevented, even if he had seen it coming, which he had not, because in all his years of running the machine, no part of it had ever broken free and spoken on its own. "I'll cooperate," Pratt said, to the yard, to the witnesses, to the camera Delia had asked Cole to mount above the office door that morning, the one pointed only at the counter and the cars. "Whatever board, whatever review, I was given falsified grounds for an inspection. I'll say so, in writing. He set his own folder on the hood of his car, opened it, and took out the red violation notice, the one he had folded away too quickly on the first morning, the one with the reference number printed across the top. He held it up so the number faced the yard. And Delia, who had read that number in the half-second before he hit it, who had carried it home in her head and matched it under a lamp at 3 in the morning, watched the last joint of her case lock into place in front of every man in the yard. Sutton Gray stood very still at the counter. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life in rooms he controlled, and he had just discovered all at once that he was standing in a room he did not control at all. The inspector had turned. The witnesses were silent and steady and would give him nothing. The woman he had called confused had built a record with dates and witness lines and a notarized statement, and a number that bled up through every filing like rust through fresh paint. And the worst of it, the thing his face could not hide anymore, was that none of it could be undone by paper, because it was paper, all of it. And paper was the one weapon he had always believed was his alone. "This is slander," he said, and his voice had lost the last of its smoothness, gone flat and hard. "Every document you've shown is misread. You've taken coincidences and a clerk's mistake and built a fantasy the way you always did, the way you—" "There's one more," Delia said. The yard went still in a new way. She reached into the binder and drew out 2 pages, and she laid them side by side under the long gold light slanting through the office window. One was the financial authorization Sutton had brought, the one with the renewal paragraph, the one carrying her signature. The other was her divorce filing, the real one with the legal seal. "You brought me this," she said, putting her finger on the authorization. "You slid it across the counter 20 minutes ago with a colored tab on it. You wanted me to sign next to my own signature so the world would see a woman agreeing again to what she'd agreed to before." She moved her finger to the signature on the authorization. "This is my name. It's a good copy. Whoever you paid studied my hand." She moved her finger to the divorce filing, to the signature there. "But there's a thing about my signature that nobody knows," she said. "I cross my T low. I've crossed it low since I was 8 years old, because a teacher named Mrs. Aldous told me I crossed it too high, and I never crossed it high again. Not once. Not in 40 years. She looked up at him then, and her voice did not shake at all. "The T on the document you brought is crossed high. You forged it. You forged my name on a financial authorization, and you dated it past the marriage, and you have been carrying it around as your proof that I gave you everything." She straightened. "It isn't proof I gave you anything," she said. "It's proof you committed forgery, and you handed it to me yourself, across this counter, in front of every man in this yard, and a camera that's been running the whole time." Sutton Gray looked at the 2 signatures. For one long moment, he did not look like a man at all. He looked like a machine that has been fed the one input. It was never built to process the gears turning, finding nothing turning again. He had spent years making her doubt what she knew. He had spent years making the truth feel like the fantasy. And now the truth was lying on a grease-stained counter in 2 columns, the high T and the low T, the one detail he could never have known, drilled into a small girl by a teacher he had never heard of in a year before he existed in her life, and it had outlasted everything he had built. That was the thing about a record kept right. It outlived the hand that tried to forge it. Holt Maddox moved then, not toward Sutton, toward the yard. "Sutton's vehicle is parked in the intake lane," he said to no one and to everyone. His voice was flat and even and entirely without heat, the voice of a man stating a fact about his own property. "There's a posted sign at the gate. All vehicles entering the processing area are subject to intake record before they leave." Sutton's head came up. "You won't touch my car." Holt looked at him with something that was almost patience. "We document what enters before it leaves," he said. "That's the rule. You drove past the sign and you blocked an active lane." He nodded toward Dutch in the crane cab. "Dutch, bring it to the scale." What happened next happened slowly, and that was the point of it, that nothing was done in heat, that every motion could have been filmed and shown to any board in the county, and would have looked exactly like what it was, which was a salvage yard following its own procedure, with a vehicle that had blocked its lane. Dutch Harmon started the crane with a low diesel cough that rolled across the yard and made the stacked hoods tremble softly in their piles. It was not fast. It was not wild. It was procedure made loud, the daily language of a place where heavy things moved only when men were paying attention. Cole set orange cones behind the black sedan. Briggs unhooked soft lift straps from the rack, the approved kind, the kind that do not scratch paint, and Holt raised one hand to slow everyone down until there was no possible moment a person could later call panic or damage. Everything was visible. Everything was documented. The camera above the office door watched the counter and the cars and nothing else. The car was not being seized. It was not marked for the crusher, which sat down the bay under its sheet metal roof, idling on its own schedule for the yard's own work. The car was being relocated to a documented holding bay because the man who owned it had blocked an active processing lane, and that was all, and the all of it was a kind of poetry. The straps went under the approved lift points. The crane took up the slack, and the black sedan polished deep enough to catch the crooked reflection of the dead cars. All around it rose 3 inches off the gravel, then 6, then a foot. Its polished wheels hanging helpless in the long gold air, while the yard dust drifted up and dulled its mirror shine. Sutton stepped back, the color draining out of his face. "You can't," he said. "Sign the visitor release," Holt said. "State you blocked an active intake lane by mistake. Move it yourself and we set it down." Delia laid the 4 documents on the counter, then the ones she had spent her nights drafting, squared and clean and plain enough that even Sutton could not twist them without showing his hand. A revocation of outdated financial authorization. A cancellation of expired vehicle permissions. A workplace no-contact acknowledgement. A property return form requiring all future communication to go through lawful written channels. Beside them, she set the forged authorization face up, the high-cross T catching the light. "You have a choice," she said. "You can refuse to sign and we relocate your car to the holding bay by the book, and you explain to the county board that's already going to be reviewing Mr. Pratt's inspection why a forged financial authorization with your name all over it, turned up in a binder of public filings that all trace to your account alongside statements from 3 women and a box of paper, one of them kept for 4 years. Or you can sign these 4 pages, take your car, and go, and we keep the forgery on file, sealed with copies in 4 places, as the thing that ends this, today, in writing." Sutton looked at the 4 documents. He looked at his car hanging in the air above the gravel, the car he had driven through the gate as if he owned the ground. He looked at Gideon Pratt standing by the silver sedan, with his own folder open, building his own record, getting clear. He looked at the bikers silent at their posts, not a mob, not a threat, just working men who had already said all they needed to say. He looked at the camera. And last he looked at Delia, and she saw the exact moment he understood that refusing would not restore his control. It would only create a clearer record of what he had tried to do. That was the math in the end. He had taught her that paper was the only weapon that walked through any door without knocking. And now the paper was on her side of the counter, and the only door left to him was the one she was holding open. At 11 minutes to 5, he picked up the pen. The first signature was sharp enough to tear the page slightly at the V of gray. The pen pressed down hard, the only violence left to a man who had never needed violence. The second came slower. By the third, his hand was sweating, and the pen slipped and he had to steady it. By the fourth, he was no longer looking at Delia at all. She checked every line before she accepted the pages. She initialed the witness boxes where the law required initials. She had Holt initial as witness, and Briggs and Cole, 3 names on 3 lines, because a thing witnessed by 3 working men is harder to call a fantasy than a thing witnessed by none. She made copies on the old printer that rattled like a coffee can full of bolts. She placed the originals in a fresh folder she had labeled that morning in clean block letters. Gray contact record, and she set the forged authorization on top of them. Sealed in its own marked sleeve, the high T and the low T, together the confession he had handed her across his own counter. Only then did Holt nod to Dutch. The crane swung the black sedan back over the gravel, slow, careful, and lowered it near the visitor lane. Not scratched, not crushed, not harmed in any way a man could complain of. Just returned to the earth, stripped of the power its owner had imagined it gave him. Sutton snatched his copies off the counter, his white shirt damp at the collar, his sunglasses forgotten on the grease-dark wood. He stood for a moment as if there were one more sentence he could say, one more tone he could use, one more way to make the room tilt toward him. There was not. "This isn't over," he said, but even he heard how small it sounded against the idle of the V-twin and the rattle of the printer and the quiet breathing of men who had already said all they needed to say. "It's over here," Delia said. She did not say it as a threat. She said it the way you read a number off a page. A fact. A thing that had been put in writing. Sutton Gray got into his car and drove it out through the gate too fast, and the tires threw a gray smear of yard dust across the perfect black paint, and nobody chased him with a single word because words would have made it about him, and it was not about him anymore. Nobody cheered when the gate rattled shut. That too would have made it about him. Instead, Dutch climbed down out of the crane cab and wiped his hands on a red shop towel. Cole picked up the orange cones and stacked them back on the rack. Briggs went back to his tickets, counting under his breath, as if a man like Sutton Gray were just one more load that had crossed the scale and been weighed and found wanting. Gideon Pratt closed his folder and looked at Delia for a moment with something that was not quite an apology, because men like Pratt do not apologize, but was the nearest thing to it he had, and then he got into his silver sedan and drove out slow and careful, a man going to write down at last what he should have refused to do in the first place. And the yard went back to work the way water closes over a place where a stone went in, as if to say that justice is not always a speech, that sometimes it is a form filled out correctly, while good people stand close enough to make fear lose its balance. Delia lowered herself into the repaired chair behind the counter and pressed both hands flat on the desk until they stopped trembling. They trembled for a while. She let them. When she finally looked up, Holt was setting something on the counter beside the intake log. It was a small plastic nameplate, the kind that slides into a frame, and it was blank. It was not blank for long. At 12 minutes past 3 the following afternoon, Holt came into the office with a work agreement printed on thick paper, the kind that does not apologize for being real. The position line read, Records and Yard Intake Manager. The pay line read $21.75 an hour. The schedule line ended every Friday with a paycheck instead of a promise. Delia read it twice, then a third time because some part of her still expected the laugh, the catch the moment someone took it back. No one did. Holt set a permanent marker beside the blank nameplate. "Spell it how you want it seen," he said. That was all. No speech. The men in this place did not make speeches. They tightened a screw on a broken chair and slid it in behind you. They set a sandwich on the counter before you knew you were hungry. They left the harder scale tickets on your side of the counter because they had figured out you liked them. They sat on a bike under the yard lamp between you and the road and called it nothing at all. Delia picked up the marker, and in slow, clean block letters she wrote her name, Delia Brandt. She slid the plate into the frame, and the little square of plastic felt heavier in her hand than anything Sutton Gray had ever tried to hang around her neck. Heavier and lighter at the same time, the way a thing feels when it is finally yours. She called Marin Vance the next morning early before the yard woke up, sitting on the cot in the back room with the door unlocked for the first time, because she no longer needed the lock against the night. She told Marin it was done. She told her about the forgery and the inspector who had turned, and the 4 pages signed at 11 minutes to 5. And then she told her the thing that mattered most, the thing she had decided in the dark a week before. There were others, Delia said. On the records, names I haven't called yet, the same number on all of them. She looked out the small window at the gray morning coming up over the dead cars. He kept a record of every woman he did this to because he couldn't help filing it back to himself. And that record doesn't have to be his anymore. It can be ours. It can be the thing that finds the next one before he does. There was a long quiet on the line. Then Marin Vance said in a voice that had set something heavy down at last, "Tell me how to help." A week after that, Marin drove the 2 counties over to see the place for herself, because she said she needed to stand in the yard where it had finally turned the way a person needs to visit the spot where they were pulled out of the water. She was younger than Delia had pictured and tired in the way Delia recognized in a mirror. And when she walked through the gate, the men did not crowd her and did not stare. They only made room the way they had made room for Delia, because that was the one thing this place knew how to do without being asked. Marin stood in the scale office for a long time looking at the binder at the 4 signed pages at the sealed sleeve with the high T and the low T. Then she looked at Ruth's shoebox, which Delia had kept, and she put her hand on it the way you put your hand on a thing that has carried more than it should have had to. 4 years, Marin said. She kept it 4 years. She knew, Delia said, even when nobody believed her. She knew the day would come when somebody would ask. Marin nodded slow, and Delia watched something change in her face. The same thing that had changed in her own face on the gray morning after the first night, the moment a person stops being prey and starts being a witness. Before she left, Marin asked for copies, not for protection, for the next woman. Because the two of them had already begun without quite saying it out loud to build the thing that would outlast all of them. The record that could be handed forward, the number that no longer belonged to the man who had stamped it on everything he touched, but to the women who had learned one by one to read it. Over the weeks that followed, Ironweg did not become a gentle place. The coffee still tasted burned by 9:30. The bottom drawer of the cabinet still stuck, unless you lifted the handle just right. The smell of oil and hot rubber still followed Delia home into her hair, except that now home was a small rented room with her own name on the lease signed by her own hand, the T crossed low. And every time the car crusher thundered awake down the bay, the office windows gave their hard little rattle. But those sounds no longer meant danger. They meant work starting, men showing up, machines doing what machines were built to do. And a woman who had once walked through the gate with $38.16 and a bag full of paper she was afraid to use, now carried a ring of keys that opened doors instead of locking her behind them. She kept the gray contact record in the safe in the garage office, the one bolted to the floor, and beside it she started a second folder thicker every month of names pulled from public filings of women, 2 counties over and 3 counties over with the same number in the corner of their lives. She did not chase them. She found them the way Marin had been found, and the way Ruth had been found, with a careful voice on a prepaid phone with the same first sentence every time. You don't know me. I think we have the same problem. I think the only way either of us stops being scared is if we stop being one woman. He can call confused and start being a record. He can't explain. Some of them hung up, some of them cried, some of them, like Ruth, had a shoebox of their own and had been waiting years for somebody to ask. And every one of them, whether they were ready that day or not, learned the one thing Delia had crossed the whole length of her fear to learn, which was that they were not alone and had never been alone, and that the man who had made each of them feel like the only one had left on every piece of paper the proof that there had always been more. Holt never called himself a hero, and he would have walked out of any room where someone tried to. And Delia never once let anyone call her helpless, because she had learned the cost of the word. The brotherhood around her was not soft, and it was not polished, but it was steady in the ways that mattered. A repaired chair, a guarded gate, a truthful witness line, a camera pointed only at the counter and the cars, a sandwich set down before anyone asked if you were hungry, 3 working men who would initial a witness box without being asked twice. Some families are born around kitchen tables, and some are found between rusted fenders and ledger books, old leather, and the low thunder of V-twin engines under an evening sky. Delia Brandt had walked into Ironwake Auto Salvage because no one else wanted the job. She had stayed because for the first time in years, the life in front of her belonged to her. Written in her own hand, the T crossed low, the way a teacher had taught her before she was 8 years old, the way no man would ever forge again. She had learned that paper could be a cage in the wrong hands. And she had learned, standing behind a grease-dark counter in a yard full of dead cars and living men, that in the right hands, the very same paper could become a door. And that once you knew how to hold the pen, you could spend the rest of your life holding that door open for the next person who came down Route 46 with nothing in their pocket but the last of their courage, looking the way she had been looking for a place where the thing chasing them would be afraid to step inside.